Hello and welcome to the Arms Control Poseur podcast. My name is William Alberque, Director of Strategy, Technology, and Arms Control at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in Berlin. I will be your host as we explore the world of arms control. On each podcast, I will interview the great and the good of the arms control community about a current event related to a treaty or agreement, past, present, or only proposed. Then together we will go, hopefully, deep enough on the history and functioning of the agreement to help you make sense of it all. And, well, that's the idea anyway. This podcast is funded by the European Union Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium. Now let's get underway. Welcome to the Arms Control Poseur podcast. My name is William Alberque, and today our special guest is the Ambassador for Strategic and Arms Control at the Finnish Foreign Ministry and the Chair of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty 2023 Preparatory Committee. Thank you for coming on the podcast, Jarmo. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, William. It's a pleasure to be and speak with you on these very important matters.
Now, it's great to have you, and we do have important matters to talk about today. Today, we are going to discuss in depth the Treaty for the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons and the role that you played as the chairman of the Preparatory Committee. Now, what I understand is that before you became the proper chair, there was a working group trying to improve how the Preparatory Committee would work. Can you tell me a little bit about that first?
Yes, with pleasure. I mean, the working group is a novel innovation which was agreed in the review conference in August 2022. The president of the review conference, Gustav Slauinen, when he saw that it was not possible to have an outcome document from the review conference, so tried to anyway have decisions which were possible to make at that stage. One of the decisions was to establish the working group on further strengthening the NPT review process. And I think it was a very bold decision or proposal by the president of the conference, and it was agreed by every country in that conference. So then I became also the chair of this working group, and I held consultations during the spring of 2023 with different delegations in different formats, in person, virtually, bilaterally, in order to find out what kind of ideas different delegations have for the further strengthening of the review conference. I mean, and once again, in the review process, there has been many years, a lot of complaints about how the review conference or the review process works. There are defiances, it doesn't work well, and so on. So there were many issues which people were always complaining about. But then I thought also it's going to be interesting to see whether there's going to be concrete proposal, what could we do better in order to actually have the review process to be better fit for task. And in the summer when we had the meeting, I think that we were quite successful in that. The delegations were very well prepared. They had prepared very good working papers for the working group, and the discussion and debate in the working group was very interactive. Delegations were reacting on what other delegations were saying, developing on ideas, which happens very seldom actually in the NPT meetings. So in that sense, it was a very different kind of meeting.
And so were they able to agree on certain measures for the NPT, or at least come up with some new ideas?
There's a lot of ideas altogether, and I would say that there's a wide range agreement on many practical things which should be done. I mean, starting from the early selection of the chairs of the preparatory committees to have a better continuity in the review process, which lasts anyway 3 years, and many other practical things, imposing time limits, and things like that, which are very non-nonsense, small things. The big issue in the meeting was the enhanced transparency, enhanced accountability, better reporting, especially by the nuclear weapon states. So this became a make it or break it a matter, because this was really substantive, and I would say that the large majority of the states parties would have been ready to make a recommendation that there would be more uniform reporting by the nuclear weapon states, more regularly, and also in a way that there would be interactive discussions based on those reports. But in the end, there were some delegations which were not ready to agree on this, and in that sense, it became clear that we cannot have a set of agreed recommendations, because majority of the states parties really wanted to have the important matter on the accountability, and when they couldn't get that, they didn't want to agree on anything less.
Well, that seems a little disappointing. That, I mean, you want the biggest changes possible, but it also sounds like the process itself needs a lot of help. And it also seems a shame to hold hostage every change for just the most basic change.
Yeah, it's easy to agree with that point. But of course, there are certain realities in multilateral international negotiations that if you have something to keep and give, so you want to hold to your cards as long as possible. And as I said, the accountability issue was the most important for many of the delegations, and probably they felt that if they would just agree on a smaller set of recommendations at this stage, it would be impossible for them to return to the issue of the accountability.
So aside from the working group, all right, so now you have these recommendations, including on accountability. Are there other ways for these ideas to be agreed upon? Does this have to be agreed in a future PrepCom or at RevCon itself? Or are there other ways to get these agreements locked down sometime in the future?
Yes, and I think that this is going to be very much possible also during this review cycle, which is going to end with the review conference in 2026. Based on the work of the working group, I put forward a working paper in my own name, which holds 26 recommendations to improve and further strengthen the review process. And it includes also paragraphs concerning the accountability, reporting, transparency. And certainly my recommendation also to the next chair of the preparatory committee is that they should continue to address these issues also in the meeting in the summer of 2024. I think that the ideas are going to be ripe for decision in 2026, and I think it's going to be possible to agree in the review conference in 2026 on many of the practical recommendations which are in the working papers. Whether they are going to be exactly in the same form as they are in my working paper, or whether there's going to be some tweaking around words, so that remains to be seen. So I see that it's going to be possible to agree on ways of further strengthening the review process when it's done in the review conference, when it's going to be part of the whatever outcome document it's going to come out from the review conference. Then it's going to be possible, because then we have enough ingredients on the plate. It's going to be possible to agree on a set of recommendations and at the same time on certain other measures where everybody is going to feel that it's going to be in their national and in the common interest to agree on these measures.
So there is still some hope that this can be agreed, that this will come in at some point during the review conference process. And it sounds like just going through all of this was very useful in preparing you to chair the PrepCom committee itself.
It was useful, yeah. I mean, it's even when you have been dealing with issues for many years and been participant in the multilateral negotiations in different forms, always when you are actually dealing with persons in a meeting, you get a sense what is going to be possible, what is the atmosphere, what are the issues you really need to take care of, and then when you need to have some sensitiveness and so on. So it's always helpful to have these meetings. And I think also even that the working group was not able to agree on a set of recommendations. I guess that most of the delegations came with a positive attitude from the working group in a way that it proved to be also beneficial for the PrepCom, which once again, was not an easy task to manage.
Well, and so you were selected to be the Preparatory Committee chairman at that previous review conference. Is that correct?
No, it was only confirmed, I guess, in December 2022, because we have this rotating system that a representative of the Western European countries and others chair the first PrepCom meeting, and then the turn goes over to other regional groups.
Well, and so you then went into that first meeting again with some very good preparation because you had already met with the countries and you talked to them about their different positions and platforms. So what was like at the Preparatory Committee itself? I mean, it must have been incredibly challenging with all the political circumstances surrounding the PrepCom and having such a big agenda to get through. So what was that like? What was the atmosphere like? And what is it that you wanted to accomplish at the Preparatory Committee itself?
You're absolutely right, William. I mean, we have to see the backdrop where we were meeting in the summer. And the biggest thing, certainly, which affects everything in international cooperation, is the Russian invasion of and continued war in Ukraine. So this has an impact on everything, and you can see it, you can feel it, and it's clearly stated in many of the statements. And there are other developments in the world which are happening all the time also. Some of them directly related to the NPT or nuclear matters, like the North Korean nuclear weapon and missile programs, and then the concerns that many countries have with the program of nuclear program of Iran, even though that's a very different matter than the North Korean issue. So this was the backdrop. The other backdrop from the NPT was that we have had 2 consecutive NPT review processes without an agreed outcome. And once again, we have to remind ourselves that the NPT actually is implemented every day. I mean, we have the IAEA safeguards, IAEA technical cooperation. There are things going on in the field of nuclear arms control and disarmament, even certainly a lot of less. So the review process is very much about reviewing how the treaty has been implemented, where are the defiances, where are the successes. But once again, we have to remember that this is a diplomatic process. NPT is implemented every day. So when coming to the meeting, which happened only less than a year after the review conference, it's easy to understand that the positions of states bodies were very similar as they were in 2022. And whenever you start a new review cycle, in the first meeting, I guess the confrontation is at its highest, because that's the place where you're actually going to set your priorities, state your concerns, state your aspirations for the review process and so on, which means that you actually really strongly emphasizing and delivering your national priorities. And even if all of the states parties are very strongly committed to the NPT, there are certainly huge differences. What is going to be emphasized? What are the priorities? What are the concerns, and so on. So this was clearly present in the PrepCom, and this was actually something that I expected, and it was also something that I very much recommended for the states parties to do, because it's good to know where you start, and when you know the starting point, then you can also start to plan how are you going to overcome those differences. So this was the backdrop and probably the feeling in the PrepCom.
And so what was it that you had to produce? I mean, what was expected of you as the Preparatory Committee chair to produce at the end by agreement among the state parties?
Yeah, when we agreed on the strengthened review process in 1995, that is, how much is 28 years ago. So the idea was that the PrepComs would actually come to a political agreement on what happened in the PrepCom meeting, what kind of issues were raised, and also whether it would be possible to have any recommendations. But this is really difficult to achieve. It has been achieved only once, I guess, in the the PrepCom in 2000 something, or was it 97? But anyway, this doesn't typically happen because you know that there's going to be 3 PrepCom meetings and the review conference. Delegations are not eager to agree politically on anything in the PrepCom. So formally, we were supposed to agree on an outcome factual report from the committee. Everybody understood that this is not going to happen, but we have to go through the motions anyway and try to play that in accordingly.
Wow, that sounds really difficult. You've got all these countries, and as you said, they're coming in hot because it's the first preparatory committee, and this is where the tensions are the highest, and they want to say what they have to say, and at the same time, they're supposed to come out with an agreed document, which is incredibly rare. That sounds like one heck of an assignment.
It is, yeah, but as I said, there's an understanding. Nobody really expected, and nobody is ever going to expect that the PrepCom would agree politically on something, because once again, it's the dynamics in international cooperation. You are going to agree only when you absolutely need to agree on things. Otherwise, delegations try to promote their own interest as long as possible. So formally, yes, but everybody knows what is the reality. So I felt all the time that my responsibility was to get the review process on a good start, which is going to provide for basis for the continued work in the review process for the next PrepCom and then the third PrepCom and into the review conference, to have clarity on the issues which are on the table, to have clarity on the positions of different states bodies, to have a sense what might be possible in 2026. So it was, for the chair, it's very much about managing the process, managing the expectations, and seeing where we could probably find some kind of compromise in the coming years.
So, for you, were there big areas where you saw a convergence developing, where countries at least had some agreement on substance, where they could possibly pull together in a future PrepCom or at the RevCon itself?
Where it's going to be most possible, of course, is in the issues concerning peaceful uses. I mean, all of the states parties agree that there are a lot of peaceful uses of nuclear energy, different nuclear applications, which can help countries, for example, to achieve economic development, economic progress, to achieve sustainable development goals, where there might be practical help from the field of agriculture and medicine and so on. So there's a lot of common trust there. Of course, there are certain differences there also, but this is a field where the states parties tend to agree quite easily on those. Then in the field of proliferation, all of the states parties also share the concern about the possibility of further nuclear proliferation. Nobody wants to have more countries in possession of nuclear weapons. So once again, there's a really strong commitment and common concern about this. And there are also a lot of, if not agreement, but ideas going in the same direction, how the non-proliferation part of the treaty could be enhanced. Where we have the biggest differences, of course, are in the issues concerning nuclear disarmament. NPT is a very particular treaty in that sense that it holds a legal obligation for the nuclear weapon states, recognized nuclear weapon states, to advance nuclear disarmament. This is actually the only international legal treaty where they have committed to that. So for most of the states parties in the treaty, this is the treaty where they can actually hold recognized nuclear weapon states accountable what they are doing and what they are not doing. And everybody can see that the pace of nuclear disarmament for the last years has been very slow or non-existent, and there are a lot of differences in this field. Nobody is actually saying that the nuclear weapons should disarm tomorrow. They should give up nuclear weapons immediately, but the majority of states party are emphasizing that the treaty doesn't provide the right to hold nuclear weapons forever. There has to be some time when they have to be dismantled and disarmed. The nuclear weapon states and some other states parties are emphasizing very much about the very difficult security situation in internationally, and that this is not very conducive for nuclear disarmament. So, and then also nuclear weapon states and also states parties which are party to certain military alliances emphasize very much the role of nuclear deterrence for security, for stability in the world. So there are issues where we have basically very different approaches to the matter, and of course it's very difficult to overcome those differences. But once again, I think that in the summer we heard so many statements, so many working papers from different angles, so one can probably pass out certain issue where there might be agreement, and certainly some other issues where there's not going to be agreement in this field either. So, and then we need to work, I guess, a little bit more from every side in order to understand what is the security situation in the world, how can we actually improve that, what is the responsibility of the nuclear weapon states, what can the non-nuclear weapon states do in this respect, and also what can we do together in order to improve the situation in a way that there would be more progress in nuclear disarmament.
Well, and that's a great description of the three baskets, the three pillars of the NPT, the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, non-proliferation, and nuclear disarmament. But there are also certain evergreen crises within the treaty. We talk about Iran, or we talk about the Middle East weapons of mass destruction-free zone. We talk about North Korea and its withdrawal from the treaty and continued defiance of UN sanctions. And now we have a new factor in the NPT context with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So how did these crises, all these issues, intersect with the Preparatory Committee? Were they all issues that threatened to undermine progress and damage dialogue within the treaty? Or were you able to handle them in more of a compartmentalized way and prevent them from harming the overall work within the Preparatory Committee?
First of all, I mean, these are really going to be, and they are difficult issues within the NPT. But we have to look back also to the President's draft outcome document from the review conference in 2022. All of these issues which you mentioned are actually issued there. I mean, and there you can see what was the common ground in the end of August 2022. Probably it's a little bit different situation today on many of these issues. Starting, for example, with the Middle East. I mean, there has been now, besides the whatever is going to happen with the NPT, there has been the General Assembly conference on the Middle East zone free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, which takes some of the pressure out of the NPT. But of course, many countries are emphasizing very much, and it was clear in the summer too, that this is going to be an issue to be addressed also during this review cycle. And the war, which followed the Hamas attack against Israel in October, the war in Gaza certainly is going to have an impact, because the tensions run high in Middle East, and this is a major concern for many of the countries of the region. So that's certainly going to have an impact on what's going to happen with the Middle East zone. But I think that the most keen proponents of the Middle East zone actually also understand very well what is the political situation, what are the realities. The issue is going to be raised, but I think that nobody knows exactly how this is going to be issued in 2026. If we can manage the issue as we did in 2022, That might be one way out, but there are certainly other alternatives also. Of course, hopefully the best alternative would be that there would be an agreement on holding the conference and actually starting the all-inclusive work towards the end of the decision, which was agreed in 1995. The DPRK issue, to my mind, is going to be more complicated than it has been before. There are several factors which are going to have an impact on this. It seems that the North Korean nuclear weapons program is certainly maturing all the time. It has become more sophisticated. They're probably going to be able to have a little bit different kind of weapons, and what they are certainly going to have, they are going to have a lot of different kind of delivery vehicles, which is actually going to raise the importance of the issue, because this is going to become more and more acute security issues, not for the countries in the region, but whole of the world. So this certainly has to be addressed in a proper way. But once again, what complicates the matter is that we can see that, for example, the Russian leader and the leader of the DPRK met this year. There are news and information about arms sales, transfer of technology, and so on, which actually raise a little bit more concern and make this issue even more topical, and at the same time more difficult to agree upon. So it's going to be a challenging issue. What makes it a little bit easier than many of the other issues is that DPRK is not participating in the review process. They are not in the room, so they are not there to defend themselves. So remains to be seen how vocal some other countries are going to be in this respect. Iran is a very different issue. As of now, I guess there's a consensus that Iran has not made any decision on acquiring nuclear weapons, and they say that there's the supreme leader's fatwa on not to acquire a nuclear weapon and so on. But of course there are concerns about the nature of the nuclear program and how they are cooperating with the IAEA inspectors. So yes, it's an issue, and once again we have to see how it's going to be developing. We don't see too many positive signs in that respect also, but it's going to be a diplomatic exercise probably to be solved. And the TPNW, I guess there's more and more general understanding in the whole NPT community that this is a treaty, international treaty, which is there, which is going to be there to stay. It's not going to go away. Majority of the NPT states parties are not party to the TPNW and don't share all of it, what it contains in that sense. But I find that the debate between the proponents and on the opposition vis-a-vis the TPNW has become better. I mean, there's a little bit better interaction. There's not an agreement on the substance of the treaty, but there's probably a better understanding of why the treaty is there. But once again, it's a fairly new treaty, and let's see how that's going to be further developed. I guess a big tipping point is going to be if the treaty is going to be having more than 100 states parties to it. Then it's going to be an even more an important matter. But as of now, I wouldn't be concerned about that it would derail somehow the review process. I don't think so.
We're going to take a quick pause here. When we come back, William Alberque in conversation with Ambassador Jarmo Viinanen. You're listening to the Arms Control Poseur podcast. So, Jarmo, you mentioned how it remains to be seen what the unfolding relationship between Russia and North Korea will mean because of all the reports of North Korean weapons sales to Russia. I suppose it also remains to be seen what the political price will be for Iran's cooperation with Russia and whether, on both these issues, we could see a lack of unity within the P5 on how to move forward, which could severely limit the ability to impose sanctions and to take concerted action in the future. I guess we just don't know where the P5 is going to go from here.
Right. The disunity between the P5s have been clear already in the review conference 2022 before that, and that's going to be there also in the future. It has certain positive things and some negative things in a way. One could always argue that if the P5s are able to agree on certain common positions, it's going to be very difficult for the 186 other states parties to break that view in a way. So in that position, the P5s actually could exercise a way too powerful impact on the review process. But at the same time, probably if they could be agreeing on something, it might be easier to agree on a whole. I guess it's probably good for the NPT review process also to see in the current situation that there are differences between the P5s. Each of them have different priorities, a little bit different priorities. There are other issues which they would like to promote. Some of them are more flexible on some issues and some less flexible. I guess that's also educational and good for the rest of the states parties to see that there are differences between the P5 and actually what is common for them is actually very low denominator. It's about that they have the recognized right to have nuclear weapons in a way. But after that, there's a lot of differences between them. And some of them have been able to hide behind the unity of the P5s before. I guess it's going to be more difficult during this review cycle.
Well, I never thought of the upside of P5 disunity. That's a very interesting angle. But it does bring us to how the PrepCom ended. I recall I was watching this very closely on UN TV, and it was great to see you and the UN Office of Disarmament Affairs working very carefully in making sure the meeting worked, that the procedural matters were getting solved with real efficiency, and keeping the momentum of the PrepCom moving. Very positive energy, very efficient. But that appeared to come part towards the end. When it came time for the concluding actions, the atmosphere appeared to really change for the worse. And I wonder, what's your perspective? How did you see the end of that conference, and specifically the outcomes? The lack of an agreed outcome document, the whole fight over your conclusions. How did that feel from the inside of the process?
Once again, like always in this kind of conferences, the last day is going to be the day when you need to do certain things. And as I said earlier, the stated purpose is that the PrepCom would agree on a factual summary from the meeting. And as I said, this has happened only once, so nobody expected it to happen this time either. So once again, I prepared with the support of the Secretariat a draft factual summary from the meeting, trying to reflect what had been said in the room, what kind of issues were stated, and so on. To my mind, the factual summary reflected well what had been said in the room and also the sentiments which were in the room. But in that factual draft, there was also included language where some delegations had been criticizing, especially Iran, on some of the issues, and that was reflected in the factual summary. The Iranian delegation found this unacceptable. They thought that it would be wrong to single out them because a lot of other criticism vis-a-vis some other countries were not reflected in that outcome document, and they wanted to get that paragraph out of that. And in the end, they said that if that draft factual summary is not going to be changed, it cannot be issued even as the chair's working paper, just in the name of the chair, and they were ready to hold the procedural report from the meeting as a hostage. And if there wouldn't be an agreement on the procedural report, officially the meeting would have never taken place. So the meeting would have been non-existent. So in that state, I needed to make the judgment call. I mean, there were two ways to solve that issue. It was that I would change the factual summary, omitting the paragraph where there was criticism vis-a-vis Iran, and then probably have an agreement on that matter. Or then I would agree that I wouldn't issue the factual summary as the working paper of the chair. And in that situation, I felt, because I felt that it was necessary that we are going to have the procedural report, because if there wouldn't be procedural report, it would be very damaging for the whole review process. So I thought that it was a political decision. Once again, I decided that the smaller harm is not to issue my recommendation or my draft as a working paper, because I knew that all of the delegations had that paper and it was already published in one of the websites. So it's going to be there forever, even it's not going to be published as a working paper. And then that was agreeable to everybody. We got an agreement. What we are lacking is the factual summary as a working paper. But as I said, everybody knows what's in the paper, everybody has that paper, and they still have access to that paper, so everybody knows what's written in that paper in that sense. Very unfortunate. The lesson certainly, and I guess that everybody has taken that lesson, is that when we come to the review conference in 2026, it's not going to be possible to have in a possible outcome document anything which is going to be critical of any of the states parties who are participating in the meeting. So that's the state where we are.
Well, it's just interesting describing this whole process and how countries participated and then how they dropped out. I mean, is there a route to a more balanced set of criticisms, or does that just open things up, a Pandora's box, a Christmas tree upon which everyone wants to hang their own ornaments?
That might be another possibility, but I don't think that it's realistic. This would mean, in practical terms, if I just mention a couple of things, for example, that there would be language, for example, condemning, or that several delegations were critical about the Russian invasion of and war in Ukraine. There would be criticism and also raising some delegations raised the issue of proliferation concerns concerning the AUKUS cooperation. Somebody would raise the issues concerning, for example, on some of the or the process of nuclear modernization in the United States, and then many other things. So everybody can understand that it's not going to be acceptable to have this kind of language in a document which everybody has to agree to. Which government is going to be ready to, in an international document, to criticize themselves? Yeah, that is possible, but I don't think that it's going to be very probable.
Well, I'm confused. Why was the Iran paragraph in there if it was unlikely that Iran itself was going to agree upon it? Was this just part of a negotiation, or did you feel that it was so significant it had to be in there and had to get rejected?
No, it's many issues. I mean, it was significant, of course, and so. But I would say that in the end, I mean, when you prepare an factual outcome, there are several people involved, and they put together. It's usually done in the last night of the meeting, you're probably a little bit tired. You don't pay attention enough to all of the details. So it is a combination of different factors in that sense. Yeah, I've been, frankly said, I've been a little bit critical of myself in that sense, that I should have known better. I should have been more. I should have paid attention to that. That this is not going to be flying in a way. But in the midst of busy weeks and not too much sleep. So sometimes you make things which one shouldn't make.
Well, but as you pointed out, the effect is that it really doesn't matter. Everyone knows what was in your report. The next PrepCom chair will be able to draw from it, and everyone will be able to use that as a starting point of sorts. So what is the handoff now? What do you do now to prepare your successor? And how is that working out? Have you already started? Have you done a handoff? Or are you still waiting for that to happen in the new year?
There are two things which have already happened. I issued from the PrepCom, I issued a working paper which contains reflections or more of recommendations for the next chair to hold topical discussion, interactive discussion on certain topics, which I think are going to be very important in the review cycle. I mean, there are, I guess, 12 recommendations altogether. It's not going to be possible to hold topical discussions of all of these, but certainly if one reads through the paper once again, it certainly highlights which are going to be the very challenging issues in the review process. I met with the incoming chair already also in October. We'd had a very long conversation on sharing of experiences on this matter, and I shared some ideas and what he might do and might not do. It's up to him to decide how to do the things and what I have understood. So he's going to start his own consultations in the beginning of the year, and certainly going to make his own judgment calls based on the recommendations or the consultations, and to see what's going to happen in the summer.
And sorry, so who has been selected to be the next PrepCom chair?
Yeah, I mean, the next chair of the PrepCom is Akan Rahmetulin, who is the permanent representative of Kazakhstan to the United Nations. I mean, he's a very seasoned diplomat, has a lot of experience working in the environment of the UN, being a permanent representative of a country there, certainly provides him with all the qualities which you would hope from a chair of this kind of a conference.
And then you'll work with them very closely, of course, but you also play a role in the next Preparatory Committee meeting as well, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, formally, probably I'm going to be vice chair of that PrepCom. My main task at that time certainly is going to be leading the Finnish delegation to the PrepCom.
And is there any notion as to who is going to be the third PrepCom chair or the review conference president, or are those matters decided much later?
I mean, everybody hopes, of course, that these matters would be solved and decided as early as possible. The rotation, which I spoke earlier on, means that the chair of the third PrepCom comes from the group of non-aligned countries, and also the president of the conference comes from the same group. And then they have further divided that the chair of the third PrepCom would probably come from the African group, and then the president of the review conference from Asia. So we don't have any names at this point. We know the regions where they are coming from, and I think that in many countries they are thinking about the possible candidates and representatives to take care of these duties. There's a common will, as I said, to have the officers elected early enough, because that would provide better continuity for the review process. We would have the bureau in place. It would be easier for us to interact with each other, and it would also provide ample time for the chair and the president to prepare for the meeting. You don't need to do it for too long a period, but anyway, there has to be enough time to hold consultations, to learn to know the participants in the meetings and so on. It's always helpful. And also if one hasn't been dealing too much with the issues concerning nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, nuclear non-proliferation, it helps to listen, and then you can see where you have to read and perhaps study a little bit more, where you have to talk with some of the colleagues a little bit more, because international diplomacy, multilateral meetings are an art form of itself, but the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is certainly also an art form in itself, where it takes some time to get into the issues, to say it very straightforward.
Well, it sounds like that's some great advice for your successors as well, and I think we can leave it there. So thank you, Ambassador. That was a great conversation about the Preparatory Committee, the incoming chairs, advice for them, and how everyone can work together to make this review conference a success. I look forward to having another conversation with you perhaps later in the process, and you can tell us how it's all been going. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much, William. This has been a pleasure.
That's great. That's it for part one. When we come back, we'll talk to Jarmo about his life and times. Back in just a second. And now we're back for part two of the podcast with Ambassador Jarmo Viinanen. And this is the part of the podcast where I ask him about his life and times and how he got into this field. So, for the first question, Ambassador, how did you get into arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament? Is this an issue around which you had lots of concerns when you were younger, or is this something you ran into during university, or something that came into later in your career?
Certainly it has come much later to my career. I mean, it's the newest thing which I've been doing. I mean, of course, when you're in a foreign service like Finland, you get to deal a little bit with the issues concerning arms control, especially. Early in my career, when I started already in the late 80s, I did some work concerning, for example, for the OSCE negotiations on the Vienna document and related issues. I was following at that as a young officer. And then when I was the permanent representative to the United Nations, I was the chair of the first committee, which is the Committee for Disarmament and Security on 2011-2012. But it had been quite superficial until that. I started in this position 7 years ago in the autumn of 2016, first mainly dealing with the conventional arms control issues in Europe, and then quite suddenly and quite quickly expanding especially to the nuclear field. So this has been the first time that I have been dealing with arms control issues in a very, how do I say, in a more in-depth way.
Did you know about the Foreign Service itself earlier in your career? Was it something you had your heart set on? Or were you looking around for jobs in college and that seemed like a good idea? How did you come to the Foreign Service in the first place?
Yeah, this is pretty interesting, and this is a story which I also very often tell when I go to speak to schools or universities. I started my studies in the University of Turku, when I was already 23. I mean, many people graduated at that age, but I had been studying something else and I had been working. But then I started my studies in Turku, and there were a lot of other people who started at the same time, and of course we were asked about our aspirations at that time. I really didn't know whether I have any aspiration. I just wanted to graduate as quickly as possible. But there were many people in the room who said that they would like to study international politics, and then they would like to join foreign service and so on. And I remember myself thinking long time ago, certainly not. This is nothing for me. I want to do something else, more in the, how do I say, management, administration side. So in my studies, I actually didn't study anything on international relations, just one course. So this became much later, and this came only when I joined the Foreign Service, and the background for that also, if you if you bear to listen to me, but it was, we had already one child at that time, and we were expecting another one. I was playing on the playground with our daughter, who was 2 years at that time, and there was another guy playing with his son on the same playground. I didn't know him, but he recognized me because I had been the Secretary General of the Student Union before. And he asked whether I have considered joining the Foreign Service. I said I actually never did consider that. But I remember going home then after that, and I told my wife that I met Petri, and he was asking this question. And we thought, okay, why not, if this might be an idea also. And it was a coincidence that this was probably on Saturday, and on Sunday, the major newspaper actually has the advertisement from the Foreign Ministry that they are going to try to get new people to the diplomatic service. So I applied, and I somehow passed all the tests and joined the Foreign Service in '88. So that's the way how it started.
So within the Foreign Service, before you came into arms control, what was your favorite assignment?
I mean, I've been blessed. I've been blessed in the service. I always got to the postings where I wanted to be. I was first in Vienna, then I was in Tel Aviv, Israel, then I was in Washington, D.C. So everything seemed to be okay. But then a big change happened. I mean, if you speak about foreign postings, so certainly to be ambassador somewhere is something specific. But if you think about something else, so certainly the 4 years we spent in Israel from 90 until 94, the first real assignment, 4 years, deputy head of the mission and so on, that is an experience which you never forget. This is an experience which you recall very often. So that was really wonderful, I would say. But as I said, I've been blessed in this career. When we returned from Washington, quite suddenly I was recruited to join the foreign minister's team, to be the foreign minister's advisor. And then when she was elected the president of Finland, so I followed her to become the foreign policy advisor. And after that also the Secretary General of the President's office. So I got to do so many nice things, so it's very difficult to say what is the favorite, except of course I mean, if two things I would say, to work with the president, or three things, Tel Aviv, and then also to be permanent representative ambassador to UN. So, I mean, but there are so many highlights, so it's impossible to say.
Was there any assignment you had in the Foreign Service that you didn't really care for, that you just thought, it's not really my favorite?
There can be difficulties. I remember coming to Washington, D.C. I was then dealing with the trade policy issues and so on. And it was to be a junior diplomat in a town where the competition is really hard, and when your knowledge about certain things is quite limited. So that was sometimes very challenging, I have to admit.
Okay, so one last question. If you could go back at any point in your career and give yourself some advice, what would that advice be, and when would you have needed that advice?
I mean, nothing comes to my mind. I mean, probably I would have needed advice on very many occasions, yeah, earlier and later. Uh, but I would say that always learn from your mistakes. Learn from the good things, because you can always do better in that sense. I have I have very few regrets in that sense, that it would be possible to say, to really what should I do otherwise? What would be the advice? But just to say that I have enjoyed very much this position where I am now. It takes some time to get into the issues, and there are things which you can learn every day, and this makes it fascinating. But it's also nice to be, because the foreign service in Finland is very much a generalistic approach. You have to do different things. Now being able to concentrate on the arms control issues, and it's good to feel that one knows at least something about the field you are working at.
Well, I think everybody can agree, Jarmo, that you know a great deal about arms control, non-proliferation, disarmament, multilateral diplomacy, and this huge mess that we are in right now. And I'm really grateful for your efforts to try to make a difference in the NPT process, in trying to make the world a safer place. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for educating us, not only about the issues, but about your life and times as well. I think it was really great to hear from you, and I look forward to having you on again sometime in the future. Thank you, Jarmo.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
That's all we have time for today on the Arms Control Poseur podcast. My thanks once again to Ambassador Jarmo Viinanen for being with us today. Thanks to the EU Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Consortium for funding this podcast. Thank you, as always, to Bjorn Freeman for the excellent music. See you next time.
I repeat again. I repeat again. I repeat again. I repeat again. I repeat again.